First contact with beauty. The moon hung low over the horizon, its pale light refracting off the crystalline surface of the alien landscape. Beneath its fractured glow, Lieutenant Marek Kovac trudged across the brittle ground, his boots crunching over shards that shimmered like shattered glass. The air was cold but breathable, a stroke of fortune amid the unknown dangers of Gliese 9D. Marek's gloved hand hovered near his holstered sidearm, though he doubted a weapon could defend against the mysteries this world harbored. "Anything on your scanner?" he asked, his voice distorted through the comlink. Behind him, Dr. Alara Voss, the team's exobiologist, adjusted the bulky handheld device strapped to her arm. Its holographic display pulsed faintly, tracking unseen energies. Readings are unstable, but something is emitting a consistent signal about 2 clicks north. Whatever it is, it's organic or close enough to mimic it. Marek frowned. The Talisman's mission was supposed to be a simple survey. Map the terrain, log potential resources, and avoid unnecessary risks. Yet this signal, this inexplicable beacon, had drawn them like moths to flame. It had started faintly, an anomaly in the ship's scans, and then escalated to a symphony of encrypted pulses, too precise to be natural. They pressed onward, the landscape shifting from jagged crystals to rolling dunes of black sand. The wind whispered with an eerie, hollow resonance, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone. Marek glanced back at Alara. Her auburn hair, tied in a utilitarian braid, framed a face hardened by discipline but softened by the wonder of discovery. She had argued vehemently to investigate, and though Marek had protested, he couldn't deny the pull of her conviction. "This place," Alara murmured, her gaze sweeping the alien horizon. "It's like it's alive. Every molecule feels deliberate." "You sound awfully poetic for a scientist," Marek said, his tone light, but his expression wary. Alara smirked. "And you sound awfully cautious for a soldier." "Caution's kept me alive," he shot back, though a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. They crested a dune, and the source of the signal came into view. Marek's breath caught. Before them stood a structure, if it could be called that. It resembled a massive, iridescent bloom, its petals unfurling toward the sky in a frozen moment of perfect symmetry. Colors shifted across its surface, hues of violet, gold, and cerulean bleeding into one another like liquid light. The air around it thrummed, not with sound, but with a vibration that resonated deep in Marek's chest. Alara stepped forward, her scanner crackling with static. "It's alive," she whispered, her voice reverent. "Or something close. The signal, it's coming from this entity." Marek reached out instinctively, gripping her shoulder. "Wait, we don't know what it's capable of." She didn't pull away, but her eyes, wide with awe, stayed fixed on the phenomenon. "This could be the first true alien intelligence we've ever encountered. We can't just stand here." Before Marek could respond, the bloom shifted. Its petals quivered, then began to open further, revealing a core that pulsed with light. Marek's hand flew to his weapon. "Easy," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's responding to us?" The core's light coalesced, forming patterns that danced across its surface. Marek realized they weren't random. They were symbols, repeating and evolving, their complexity growing with each cycle. "It's a language," Alara breathed, her fingers twitching over her scanner. "Or a warning," Marek countered, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sidearm. Alara ignored him, stepping closer. Marek's instinct screamed at him to pull her back, but he held his ground, torn between duty and the weight of what this moment could mean. As Alara approached the bloom, the symbols began to stabilize, morphing into shapes that Marek recognized: circles, lines, spirals. He realized with a chill that they mirrored the constellation surrounding Gliese 9D, as if the entity had plucked them from the night sky. "It's trying to communicate," Alara said, her voice tinged with exhilaration. She extended a hand toward the bloom, her fingers trembling. "Alara, don't," Marek began, but it was too late. Her fingers brushed the surface, and the world erupted in light. Marek shielded his eyes as waves of color poured from the bloom. cascading over the dunes and lighting the sky in radiant kaleidoscopic hues. When the brilliance faded, he lowered his arm to see Ilara standing motionless, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Ilara," he shouted, rushing to her side. He gripped her shoulders, shaking her gently. She blinked, her gaze slowly finding his. "Merrick," I saw. Her voice faltered, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "What did you see?" he demanded, though his voice softened at her expression, an unsettling blend of joy and sorrow. "Everything," she whispered. "It showed me everything. Its birth, its purpose, its loneliness." She turned to the bloom, her voice trembling. "It's been waiting for us, Merrick. For anyone. It's the last of its kind." The bloom pulsed faintly, its light dimming, as if the effort to connect had drained it. Merrick glanced at it warily, then back at Ilara. "And what does it want?" "To give us a choice," she said, her voice barely audible. "It can share its knowledge, everything it knows about the universe. But it comes with a cost." Marek's stomach tightened. "What cost?" Ilara met his gaze, her eyes haunted. "It warned me. Understanding its knowledge will change us in ways we can't undo. It's not just information, it's perspective, a truth so vast it might shatter who we are." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the bloom. Marek's mind raced. Humanity had long dreamed of first contact, but this was not what he had imagined. The choice felt too monumental for two people stranded on an alien world. "Ilara," he said finally, his voice low, "we need to think this through. This isn't just about us. It's about everyone back home." She nodded, her expression resolute but tinged with doubt. "I know. But Merrick, what if this is why we're here? What if we were meant to find it?" The bloom pulsed again, its light dim but insistent, as if it were waiting. Merrick exhaled, his breath misting in the cold air. "Then we'd better not make the wrong choice." The bloom's light flared briefly, its patterns shifting once more, a question, unspoken but undeniable. Merrick and Ilara exchanged a glance, their fates bound by the decision before them. And then, together, they stepped closer. The ethical dilemma and experimentation. Dr. Eleanor Voss stood in the sterile brilliance of Lab 7, her reflection faintly visible in the reinforced glass separating her from the chamber beyond. Inside, Subject Theta, a 14-year-old boy with luminous eyes that seemed too old for his face, sat on a metal stool. Electrodes sprouted from his shaved scalp like invasive weeds. He stared at the wall, unmoving, a picture of calm that unnerved everyone but her. "I'm running out of time, Dr. Voss," Dr. Marcus Rose said, his voice clipped and impatient. He leaned over the console, his finger poised above the activation button. The room's cold fluorescence highlighted his thinning hair and the worry lines bracketing his mouth. "Either we proceed or pull the plug. The board won't wait much longer for results." Eleanor didn't look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Theta. "You don't understand what you're asking." "What I understand," Marcus snapped, "is that this experiment could redefine humanity. Or end us, depending on your hesitation." She turned to face him, her voice calm but resolute. "Theta is a child, not a lab rat. If we proceed without verifying his cognitive resilience." Marcus cut her off. "His resilience? He's already surpassed every benchmark. Increased memory retention, problem-solving capabilities that outpace top-tier AI, and control over neural augmentation no one thought possible." He gestured to the monitors displaying Theta's brain activity, an intricate dance of spikes and valleys. "He's the future, Eleanor. You know that." Eleanor's jaw tightened. The future. The phrase echoed in her mind, laden with promise and dread. Theta had been brought to the Institute at 6, a prodigy discovered in the wreckage of an orphanage fire. What began as an educational initiative to nurture his gifts had spiraled into something darker. Neural enhancements, cognitive rewiring, experiments that teetered on the edge of legality and morality. "Even if he's ready," Eleanor said, "are we? Have you considered what happens if we push him too far? If his mind fractures under the strain?" Marcus gave her a long, hard look. "We're scientists, not philosophers. Progress demands sacrifice. Eleanor wanted to argue, but the door to the observation room slid open before she could. Dr. Nadia Karim, the Institute's lead bioethicist, entered, her expression unreadable. She carried a slim tablet, which she placed on the console. "I've reviewed the latest metrics," Nadia said, her voice measured. "Theta's psychological evaluations show signs of compartmentalization. He's suppressing emotions tied to the augmentation. That suppression might protect him now, but it's a temporary solution. It could unravel under additional stress." "Thank you, Dr. Karim," Marcus said dismissively. "But we're here to test limits, not coddle him." Eleanor shot Nadia a pleading glance, but the bioethicist's face remained impassive. "What would you have me do, Nadia? Approve this?" Nadia hesitated, then turned to Marcus. "If this goes wrong, you'll be responsible for the fallout. Not just professionally, but morally. Do you understand that?" "I understand that hesitation will cost us everything," Marcus said, his voice sharp. He pressed a button, and the chamber lights brightened. Theta blinked and slowly turned his head toward the observation window. His gaze locked onto Eleanor's, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of something. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. Eleanor's stomach churned. She stepped closer to the glass, her hand hovering inches from its surface. "Theta," she said softly, knowing he couldn't hear her. "Begin the trial," Marcus commanded. "No!" Eleanor whirled around, her voice louder than she intended. "We can't." Marcus overrode her protest, his hand slamming down on the console. The chamber filled with a low hum as the neural augmentation array activated. Inside, Theta's body stiffened. His eyes fluttered shut, and his breathing quickened. The monitors erupted with data, the spikes on the screen growing erratic. "Stop it!" Eleanor shouted, lunging for the console. Marcus grabbed her arm, his grip ironclad. "Let go of me!" "Enough, Eleanor!" Marcus growled. "This is science, not sentimentality." Eleanor broke free, slamming her palm onto the emergency shutdown switch. The hum ceased, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. Theta collapsed to the floor. Eleanor rushed into the chamber, dropping to her knees beside the boy. She pressed trembling fingers to his neck, relieved to find a pulse. "Theta," she murmured, brushing a hand over his forehead. His eyelids fluttered open, and he gazed up at her, his expression distant. "Dr. Voss?" he whispered, his voice weak. "I'm here," she said. "You're safe now." Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face dark with fury. "You've sabotaged years of work," he said through gritted teeth. "No," Eleanor replied, her voice steel. "I've saved him." "From what?" Marcus spat. "From becoming something greater than all of us? From realizing his potential." Eleanor rose to her feet, her body shielding Theta. "From becoming a casualty of your ambition." Nadia stepped into the room, her gaze sweeping over the scene. She spoke quietly but firmly. "This experiment is suspended pending review. Dr. Rowe, report to the boardroom." "Now!" Marcus hesitated, his fists clenched, but he eventually turned and left without another word. Eleanor knelt beside Theta once more, her heart aching at the sight of his fragile form. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the words were meant for him or herself. Nadia crouched beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said. Eleanor met her gaze, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her shoulders. "Did I?" Nadia didn't answer, and the silence that followed was louder than any argument. For now, Theta was safe, but the battle was far from over. The aftermath. The morning sun pierced through the remnants of the storm clouds, gilding the wreckage below with an almost mocking radiance. The village of Aerith had been reduced to a skeletal ruin, its once bustling marketplace now a graveyard of broken stalls and charred timber. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the sporadic crackle of dying embers. Elira knelt by the remnants of her family's forge, her calloused fingers tracing the blackened outline of an anvil. It had been the heart of their trade and her father's pride, now warped and useless. She pressed her palm against its cool surface, seeking solace, but none came. Behind her, Yerrick stood at a cautious distance. The young hunter had the gaunt look of someone who had seen too much in too short a time. His bow hung loosely at his side, its string frayed, mirroring the state of his nerves. He hesitated before speaking. "They came for the stones," he said finally, his voice low but steady. Elira turned, her eyes narrowed. "They burned everything for stones?" "Not just stones. The obsidian shards," Yerrick clarified, stepping closer. "Legends say they hold the power to reshape the world. To them, this village was a small price to pay." Elira clenched her fists, the raw anger in her chest threatening to boil over. "And you think they're just going to stop here?" Yerrick shook his head. "No, they won't stop until they've found them all." The central conflict had revealed itself like a blade drawn in the dark. The raiders who had descended upon Aerith the previous night weren't driven by mere greed or bloodlust, but by a deeper, more insidious purpose. They sought power, and power demanded sacrifice. Elira rose to her feet, brushing ash from her tunic. "Then we don't let them win. And what exactly do you propose?" "Marching into their camp armed with your grief." Jarrek's tone was sharper than he intended, but the fear in his voice betrayed him. "I propose we find the shards first," she said, unflinching. "If they're worth destroying a village over, they're worth protecting." Yerrick scoffed, but didn't argue. He had seen the flames engulf his own home, heard the screams of neighbors turn to echoes. There was no denying that action, no matter how desperate, was better than inaction. They began their search at the edge of the forest where the raiders had first appeared. Elira's sharp eyes scanned the ground for signs. A broken branch, a misplaced footprint, while Yerrick kept his bow at the ready. "Do you even know what these shards look like?" Yerrick asked, his skepticism creeping back into his voice. "They're supposed to hum," Elira replied, without looking up. "A low vibration, like a heartbeat. My father used to tell me stories." "Stories," Yerrick muttered under his breath. But he followed her nonetheless. Hours passed as the two navigated the dense woods. Shadows lengthened, and the weight of their losses pressed heavier with each step. Yet amidst the grief, an unspoken bond began to form, a fragile alliance born of necessity and a shared purpose. It was Yerrick who finally spotted it, a faint glimmer beneath the mossy roots of an ancient oak. He crouched and dug with his bare hands, revealing a shard of obsidian no larger than his palm. True to Elira's words, it vibrated faintly, as though alive. "This is it," he said, holding it up for her to see. Elira took the shard gingerly, her expression a mixture of awe and trepidation. The surface was unnaturally smooth, reflecting her face in distorted ripples. She felt its hum in her fingertips, resonating with a strange, almost hypnotic rhythm. "What now?" Yerrick asked, his voice tinged with unease. Elira didn't answer immediately. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of possibilities and doubts. "We keep it safe," she said at last, "and we find the others before they do." But the forest had other plans. A sudden rustling in the